In a quiet suburb of St. Louis, Missouri, the Anderson family had always appeared exemplary. Mary Anderson, a 67-year-old widow, had been raising her 15-year-old grandson James since his parents' tragic death in a car accident 10 years ago. At first glance, she seemed to be a caring grandmother, providing her grandson with everything necessary: quality education, proper nutrition, and constant attention. The first warning signs emerged in early 2019 when the school psychologist noticed James's unusual behavior. The teenager avoided socializing with peers, especially girls, and showed signs of severe anxiety whenever his family life was mentioned. Mrs. Parker, the English teacher, noticed that the themes in his essays invariably revolved around suffocating control and the desire for freedom. The Andersons lived in a spacious Victorian mansion that Mary had inherited from her late husband. Neighbors often saw the grandmother picking James up from school, always holding his hand despite his age. She attended all school events, monitored his every move, and firmly prevented any attempts at communication with other parents or children. The family's social standing was quite high. Mary Anderson, a former psychology professor at the local university, was respected in academic circles. Her late husband had been a renowned surgeon who left the family a substantial inheritance. This social position long served as a shield, deflecting any suspicions of family dysfunction. By the end of 2019, teachers began noticing physical changes in James's behavior. He often came to school with red eyes and complained of insomnia. The school nurse repeatedly documented high blood pressure and signs of constant stress. However, Mary Anderson firmly rejected all attempts to arrange meetings with social services, using her connections in the local administration and her impeccable reputation. The situation was complicated by the fact that James was an excellent student, participated in science Olympiads, and outwardly appeared to be a well-adjusted child from an affluent family. This created significant difficulties for social services intervention, as they couldn't find formal grounds for a more thorough investigation into the teenager's living conditions. In early 2020, Mary Anderson's guardianship over her grandson took an even more disturbing turn. The subsequent investigation revealed that the grandmother had installed a sophisticated surveillance system in the house, including cameras in James's bedroom and bathroom. His phone was found to have special location tracking software installed, as well as a program that recorded all incoming and outgoing messages. During subsequent interrogations, it was discovered that Mary systematically checked her grandson's personal belongings, read his diary, and controlled every aspect of his life. She established a strict daily schedule where every minute was planned. James had to report his whereabouts every 30 minutes, even while at school. Teachers later testified that he often interrupted classes to send messages to his grandmother. The control over the teenager's social contacts raised particular concern. Mary prohibited him from participating in any extracurricular activities and categorically prevented attempts to make friends. When one of the teachers suggested James participate in the school drama club, Mary immediately appeared at school and created a scene, claiming it would distract her grandson from his studies. James's home life became increasingly isolated. His grandmother insisted that he sleep in a room adjacent to her bedroom. She demanded that the door always remain open. As investigators later discovered, Mary regularly entered her grandson's room at night, allegedly checking if everything was okay. These night visits, as the investigation showed, became more frequent and prolonged. The control extended to hygiene procedures. Despite her grandson's age, Mary insisted on being present during his bathing routines, explaining this as concern for his safety. She chose his clothes, hairstyle, and controlled his diet down to the smallest details. Detailed diaries were found in the house where Mary recorded each of her grandson's meals, his weight, temperature, and other physiological indicators. By spring 2020, James's social isolation had reached a critical point. The only people he was allowed to communicate with were his teachers and his grandmother herself. All his social media accounts were under Mary's strict control, as she deleted any messages from peers and blocked attempts to establish new contacts. The situation reached a critical point in June 2020. During one school day, the school psychologist, Mrs. Reynolds, noticed signs of physical abuse on James's arms. During a careful attempt to question the teenager, it was revealed that a serious conflict had occurred the previous night. Mary had discovered text messages between her grandson and a female classmate, Sarah Miller, which led to an aggressive outburst on her part. For the first time in years, James found the courage to talk about what was happening at home. During a 2-hour conversation with the psychologist, he described disturbing details of his life. It emerged that his grandmother not only controlled his every move but also displayed inappropriate physical intimacy. She insisted on sleeping together, forced intimate touching, explaining it as a special bond between them. Any attempts at resistance were harshly suppressed with threats that no one else would love him and that only she could take care of him. Mrs. Reynolds immediately contacted Child Protective Services. However, the process was complicated by Mary Anderson's significant influence in the local community. When social workers attempted to conduct an initial investigation, she presented impeccably prepared documents about her grandson's health condition, academic achievements, and comprehensive home care. Nevertheless, pressure from the school administration and custody services intensified. A mandatory psychiatric evaluation and an unscheduled inspection of the teenager's living conditions were scheduled. Mary, sensing she was losing control of the situation, began preparing for radical action. She withdrew a large sum from her bank accounts, ordered new documents, and began planning to leave for another state. On the night before the scheduled inspection, what specialists had feared most occurred. Mary, in a state of extreme emotional agitation, attempted to remove James from the house. When the teenager resisted, she used physical force. During the struggle, James suffered a serious head injury after falling against the corner of the kitchen table. Mary, instead of immediately calling for emergency medical help, locked her bleeding grandson in the basement, hoping to conceal evidence of the incident. Fortunately, neighbors heard the sounds of struggle and called the police. Officers arriving at the scene found James in critical condition. Mary was apprehended while attempting to leave the house through the back door with pre-packed bags and forged documents. The investigation of Mary Anderson's case took more than 8 months. Investigators discovered diaries on her computer that she had kept over the past 5 years. The entries revealed a disturbing picture of a gradually developing obsession with her grandson. Hundreds of photographs and video recordings made by hidden cameras installed throughout the house were presented as evidence. Psychiatric evaluation revealed several serious personality disorders in Mary Anderson. Experts determined that her professional knowledge in psychology had allowed her to manipulate those around her for an extended period and conceal the true nature of her relationship with her grandson. She skillfully used professional terminology and her authority in academic circles to deflect suspicion. The trial of Mary Anderson attracted national media attention. The prosecutor presented more than 50 witnesses, including teachers, neighbors, and medical professionals. The testimony of the school psychologist made a particular impression on the jury, as she detailed her interactions with James and the signs of psychological abuse she had observed over several years. The defense attempted to build their case on the argument that Mary's actions were dictated by a mental disorder that developed after the death of her husband and the loss of her daughter. The attorneys insisted that she needed treatment rather than imprisonment. However, evidence of the premeditated nature of her actions, including pre-prepared documents for escape and systematic obstruction of the investigation, disproved this version. In March 2021, the court found Mary Anderson guilty on all counts, including sexual abuse of a minor, unlawful imprisonment, grievous bodily harm, and obstruction of justice. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 20 years. James, after extensive treatment for physical and psychological trauma, was placed in the custody of his paternal aunt living in California. Specialists noted that his recovery would require long-term therapy and support. Nevertheless, the change of environment and professional psychological help began to show the first positive results. The Mary Anderson case led to substantial changes in Missouri's child protection system. The Department of Social Services initiated a complete revision of response protocols for reports of suspicious behavior by guardians. Special attention was given to cases where guardians hold high social positions or possess professional knowledge in psychology and education. Educational institutions across the state implemented mandatory training programs for staff to recognize signs of psychological and sexual abuse. School psychologists received additional authority to conduct confidential conversations with students at the slightest signs of trouble, regardless of their family's social status. A new system for anonymous reporting of suspicious guardian behavior was developed. The medical community also learned from this tragedy. The American Psychiatric Association published special guidelines for identifying cases of sexual obsession among close relatives. Medical institutions introduced additional screening protocols for examining underage patients, especially those under the care of elderly relatives. The case resonated widely in academic circles. Several universities incorporated it into their training programs for social workers and psychologists as an example of how professional knowledge can be used to conceal criminal actions. Special attention was given to the ethical aspects of psychologists' work and the necessity for regular supervision of specialists working with children. Public organizations focused on children's rights used this case to draw attention to the issue of abuse in families where grandparents serve as guardians. Special support groups were created for children who survived similar abuse, and psychological assistance programs were developed for their rehabilitation. An important outcome was the creation of an interagency database allowing authorities to track the movement of guardians and their wards between states. This innovation significantly complicated the possibility of evading oversight agencies by moving to another jurisdiction, as Mary Anderson had planned to do. In 2023, 2 years after Mary Anderson's sentencing, her case continues to have a significant impact on American society. The documentary, The Quiet House on Maple Street, directed by renowned filmmaker Robert Hines, won a prestigious award at the Sundance Film Festival and sparked a nationwide discussion about hidden forms of domestic abuse. James Anderson, now an 18-year-old student at the University of California, agreed to give his first interview to a national television network. In an hour-long documentary, he shared his journey to recovery and his decision to dedicate his life to helping other victims of domestic abuse. His speeches on college campuses draw packed audiences, and his organization, Second Chance, assists teenagers who have survived similar experiences. Meanwhile, at the Missouri State Women's Maximum Security Prison, Mary Anderson has become the subject of intensive study by a research team from Harvard University. Their work on the perpetrator's psychological profile revealed a new subtype of psychological disorder, termed hypercare syndrome with sexual fixation. The research findings were published in leading psychiatric journals and formed the basis for new protocols in diagnosing potentially dangerous guardian behavior. The Anderson case also led to unexpected legislative consequences. A bill was introduced in the U.S. Congress, unofficially dubbed James's Law, requiring mandatory psychiatric evaluation for elderly single guardians and regular monitoring of families where minors are under the care of relatives over 60 years old. Society's reaction to this initiative proved controversial. Human rights advocates welcomed the new child protection measures, while organizations representing elderly citizens expressed concern about possible age discrimination. The discussion extended beyond the United States. Similar legislative initiatives began to be considered in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia. By the end of 2023, the Anderson family story had been incorporated into the curriculum of law schools at leading universities as an example of a comprehensive approach to identifying and preventing hidden forms of family violence. This case continues to serve as a reminder that behind a facade of respectability, terrible crimes can lurk, and social status should never become a shield from justice. In early 2024, as the Anderson case investigation continued, new shocking details emerged. During routine renovation of the old mansion, construction workers discovered a secret room in the house's basement, unknown even to investigators. The findings in this room forced law enforcement to reassess the scale of Mary Anderson's crimes. Dozens of notebooks containing detailed records dating back to the 90s were found in the sealed room. It was revealed that Mary Anderson had shown an unhealthy interest in minors long before her grandson came into her care. As a psychology professor, she maintained a private practice counseling troubled teenagers. The records indicated that some of her patients had been subjected to psychological pressure and manipulation. The FBI initiated a new investigation connected to the '97 disappearance of 16-year-old Michael Donovan, one of Mary's patients. The case, previously considered cold, gained new momentum after the discovery of the teenager's personal belongings and photographs evidencing his presence in the Anderson house. These discoveries triggered a new wave of public outcry. Several former patients of Mary Anderson came forward to law enforcement, describing strange behavior and inappropriate comments from the psychologist. Local authorities established a special hotline to collect information about potential victims. James Anderson, upon learning of the new facts, initiated the creation of a foundation to help victims of psychological abuse by mental health professionals. The foundation began actively working to identify cases of professional position abuse among psychologists and psychiatrists working with minors. Criminal psychologists showed particular interest in the case, noting its uniqueness. For the first time, they encountered a serial manipulator who used her professional knowledge to create a system of long-term psychological and sexual control over victims. This aspect of the case became the subject of numerous scientific studies and publications. By summer 2024, the Missouri State Prosecutor's Office prepared new charges against Mary Anderson, and her prison term might be extended to life imprisonment. The Anderson family's story continues to unfold, demonstrating that even the darkest secrets eventually come to light and justice, though delayed, ultimately prevails.